Your Honor, counsel. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to remind you of just a couple of things, and obviously one of them the judge has already instructed you on, that what the lawyers say is not evidence, and I am not going to go through a detailed presentation about evidence at this point and witnesses in the same way that Mr. Terry has done. But I want you to please keep in mind that which we've already talked about, where you should not be at this time forming opinions yet or making decisions in your mind because you haven't really heard. Not the one first person take that stand and testify. I also want you to know that sometimes as I go here today and I start speaking and speaking quicker, I might forget to say that the evidence will show or that you will hear. Please don't take in any way whatsoever that what I'm saying is that an adamant aspect of things. Remember that it is going to be my obligation and Ms. Hersey-Folguera's obligation on behalf of Nicole Nachtman to prove to you everything that we're telling you in opening that we believe that the evidence is going to show. You obviously at this point understand the importance, and I'm imploring you at this time to keep that open mind that we've talked about before. This is a case where every single day you are going to hear significant testimony and evidence that is going to explain to you how Nicole Nachtman went from this type of a day, this type of an atmosphere, this type of a life with her brother Joey, who you will also hear from in this courtroom, to where she was ultimately arrested, and she sits here today in this courtroom facing two extremely serious charges. I know it's very hard to ask you to not reach conclusions based on what you have heard, but I want you to understand that it is my intent and that of Ms. Hersey-Folguera to provide to you a full picture of Nicole Nachtman's life so that you will understand how you go from being born and being brought into this world by parents and then ultimately sitting in a courtroom as we are today. You're going to hear from family members. You're going to hear from, loosely, friends and or individuals that Nicole Nachtman knew at FSU. You're going to hear experts that are going to testify, and they're going to testify and tell you that they've talked to individuals, that they perhaps have spoken to Ms. Nachtman, that they have reviewed records, not records from August of 2015 forward. In other words, not from the day that Nicole Nachtman was arrested and charged, but from way back when Nicole Nachtman came into this world, as every person does, with the hope of happiness and the hope of a future that would have taken her somewhere other than a courtroom in Tampa, Florida. You will have independent corroboration of the things that affected Nicole Nachtman's life. And the reason that I say independent corroboration is because quite often people will say, well, but that's from the defendant. That's what the defendant says. That's what this person, the defendant, says. This is going to be a case that it's going to be important for you to listen carefully to everyone, because you're going to have an opportunity to hear so many people that really knew Nicole through either their family, through FSU, or really through things that most kids don't even want to go through, and that is psychological evaluations, social and psychological reports when you're in elementary school. You're going to find, as we give you this picture and as we walk you through this life of Nicole Nachtman, that one of the things that you will have to determine is what was happening that led to the deaths of Myriam and Robert Dienes. Where was Nicole Nachtman at the time? And if in fact there is a justification for the deaths of Robert and Myriam. And that's hard. Just as Mr. Terry just said to you, can you imagine being killed by your daughter? I'm going to tell you right now, the things I'm saying to you is not to paint a brush, to just gain your interest today or to garner sympathy. This is because there is an obligation to tell you a full and complete story, to tell you how and why Nicole Nachtman's life and her experiences and the things that she went through led her to develop a mental illness that is real and that exists, that created a psychotic break that resulted in the death of Myriam and Robert Dienes, her mother and her stepfather, in August of 2015. Nicole Nachtman is and was a broken individual, young child, young lady. Wherever you start, she is and was, and it started early on. She's broken because she was a biologically vulnerable child who lived in chronic turmoil and instability. Common sense tells you that from the time that you are born and brought into this country and into this world, your development actually begins. Everyone knows the importance of everything that happens to you as a child when you're born from day one. Early on, bodies, brains, they're susceptible to stress, they're susceptible to trauma. Nicole Nachtman's childhood was marked not by a contested type of atmosphere, but by a warlike custody battle from the inception, from her conception, as a matter of fact. Suffering through abusive acts and disappearing support systems. Her father, her biological father, Ronald Nachtman, who obviously loved her and fought for her in a custody battle, was eliminated from her life due to the custody being awarded to her mother, Myriam. By most accounts that you will hear from anyone, her brother, Joseph Carey Jr., was in fact the person that Nicole was closest to and continues to be close to, who you have heard already has struggled with the position that he has found himself in this case. What you will also hear is that her brother, Joseph Carey Jr., disappeared from her life in the tender ages, under the age of 5. Again, because she was growing up in a biologically vulnerable and unstable life. In fact, what you will learn is that Joseph Carey Jr. chose to leave his mother's home because of the abusive and instability of his home life with both his biological father, Joseph Carey Sr., and his mother. You will learn that Nicole also lost her brother, Kevin, at a young age because he passed away. You will learn that her environment existed of going from state to state, school to school, mother to grandparent, to uncles that were trying to assist her, but there was instability. And although, yes, Myriam was working, I want you to, again, keep an open mind and listen to the things that were happening. For whatever decision and for whatever reason Myriam was making these decisions, it is the impact on Nicole Nachtman that you need to take into consideration. Yes, while many of her needs were being met, you will learn that the loss of these support systems has an impact on ultimately where Nicole Nachtman is today and was in August of 2015. You will learn that she was incapable from an early age of being able to navigate through the damaging emotional and psychological environment she lived in. Yes, she had a very successful and demanding and domineering mother who refused to acknowledge that Nicole Nachtman was not as strong as she was. The evidence is going to show you that family members, close family members, not of her biological father who's not in her life, not of Robert Dienes who's not in her life initially, but family members of Myriam herself start to have concerns about the psychological and maturity, emotional development of Nicole. Yet no one had the courage to intervene, and no one had the courage to talk to Myriam about the things that were going on. You will hear that these comments and concerns were even expressed by other individuals in the voluminous records that exist that experts have relied upon. You will have teachers, you will have doctors' evaluations that recognize the deficits that existed from Nicole's early on stages. The reasons for this will become more clear for you. Again, Nicole was born in February of 1994 to Ronald Nachtman and to Myriam Carey. At that time, Nicole's mother had two sons already, Joseph Carey Jr. and Kevin Carey. And as a matter of fact, at the time of Nicole's conception, Miss Carey was herself in the middle of a contentious and bitter divorce from the father, the biological father of her two sons. Joseph Carey, Joey Carey, as he's referred to, Jr., is going to talk to you about how that relationship and how that divorce led him not to just leave, but to run away from those parents and to run away to, yes, the grandmother, the same grandmother that you will learn would take care of Nicole Nachtman whenever she was going from state to state, where she could stay, where she would visit in these later years once her mother and stepfather moved to Tampa, Florida. You will hear that our experts have relied upon evaluations by a Dr. Joan Anderson that had to evaluate Ronald Nachtman and Myriam Carey, and imagine this, at the age of 3, evaluating Nicole Nachtman, a 3-year-old, because of the bitter custody battle that is going on. And you'll learn that the experts noted that, Dr. Anderson noted, that Nicole had walked at 9 months of age. She had actually spoken some words at about a year. But she was not toilet trained by the age of 3 at the time that this ongoing bitter custody battle is going on. Is that our first sign of a lack of development of a child? You'll need to listen to what is said by the experts that testify in this courtroom. During that time period, during the time period of this contentious battle with Ronald Nachtman and Myriam Carey, Nicole Nachtman is going literally back and forth between her parents. She's in a number of different daycare centers. She's witnessing untold numbers of both physical and verbal altercations between her parents. And the one thing that comes out of what Dr. Anderson says that the experts relied on is that if that was going to be the relationship of the parents, if they were going to continue to have constant altercations, that things would never change between these two people, and that there would be psychological damage to Nicole Nachtman. Joseph Carey Jr., Joey Carey, will tell you about his childhood. And he will describe for you what was the difference perhaps in how I lived in my environment with my mother and how Nicole Nachtman was living in the environment with her mother, his mother. The same mother, different fathers. And he will tell you, Kevin and I had each other. Nicole had no one. Kevin and I could support each other. Nicole had no one. And before everybody says, why didn't she pick up the phone and call Brother Joey? Let's think about this in the context of Nicole Nachtman's age, where Joey is, joining the military, and let's use our common sense. You're going to call the person who ran away from the same environment that you're in and has made a life for himself in a different direction. And just as Kevin and Joey may have talked about, or Joey and Nicole may have talked about, you know, mom this and mom that, your common sense will be able to tell you that they'll also be able to talk about how volatile these relationships were. how it's just not good to be yelled at, how it's just not good to be demeaned in some way. Just like Joey didn't want to be in turmoil and volatile situations, the reality of it is Nicole Nachtman lived in turmoil and an abusive relationship and did not develop and manage to find a way to navigate herself through life, and that's what the evidence is going to show to you. With her brother's death, she's now suffered the trauma of not having a father in her life, the trauma of everything that went on through that bitter custody battle, the loss of a brother who decides to leave and go somewhere where I can be in peace, and the death of a brother. Traumas, changes to her support systems, and that's in 2003. And in 2004, the evidence will show you that Myriam Dienes does in fact marry Bob Dienes. The evidence is going to show you that Nicole Nachtman actually attended 13 different schools before graduating from high school here in Tampa. The schools were in Virginia, the schools were in Florida. The changes were almost yearly. You will hear the school records that show academic problems, behavioral concerns. You will hear that from psychological and social reports as early as the 3rd and 4th grade that the experts again have been relying upon. Because in the end of this, I'm going to tell you why all this is important and why I keep saying, and they relied upon, and they relied upon. You will hear that Nicole Nachtman was sent to a military boarding school right down the road here in the Bradenton, Manatee type of area, even though Myriam's family, her mother's family, lived in Tampa. And they would have readily accepted her in the homes to help her and let her live with them, and instead she's sent to a military school. The family did not agree with the decision that Nicole's mother made, and I believe that you'll hear that from, again, witnesses. Instead, you're probably saying, well, that's Myriam's choice. She's the mother. But the answer to that question, and I want you to listen to this for the evidence to show it to you, the family had already begun to see changes in Nicole. And the changes become even more prevalent after attending the military boarding school. No longer is she happy, no longer is she bubbly, no longer is she singing and dancing, which is how Joey wants to remember Nicole. The evidence is going to show you, and the testimony is going to show you, that this instability in her life, this lack of addressing her academic and psychological observations that were being observed by the people that were with her more often than her mother, her family members, teachers, doctors evaluating her. Still no intervention, still no treatment. We just let Nicole Nachtman continue to go through life with these things. The evidence is going to show you that the school evaluations made very specific observations, emotional problems, a lack of focus, disorganized thoughts. You're going to learn that there was more deterioration in Nicole Nachtman's life, because as she's sitting here in Tampa, Florida, attending the 7th grade, making pretty good grades, A's and B's, living with her grandmother, her mother takes her and moves her to Virginia and has her repeat the 7th grade. You will learn that her emergency school contacts changed often, depending on where she was going to school and depending on who her mother chose to have as the contact point during that time. Again, that shows no stability. The evidence is going to show you that stability lacks 4. Shows you that a gathering of information about Nicole Nachtman and her needs, her challenges, the situations that are happening to her. You will hear that people are not acting upon it, and some of them Some of her own family members will say, I didn't even know about all of that. You will hear that when Nicole Nachtman was in school, in high school one year, here in Tampa, Florida, at Sickles High School, in close proximity where her maternal grandmother, Myriam's mother, lived, and where uncles were close by, you will hear that instead the decision that Myriam made was that Nicole should live in an apartment alone. You will hear that her family will say that they would call her and check on her because, again, that was something that they did not necessarily agree with. It's because they were observing at this time that Nicole was having difficulty navigating through daily routines, through school routines. You will also hear the neighbors that are going to testify, the neighbors of Bob and Myriam Dienes, where Nicole would spend the summers and her breaks. You will hear them say they never saw any friends coming and going of Nicole's age. You will hear her own family members tell you they don't remember any friends or relationships that Nicole created, with the exception of maybe one in this entire time. You will hear family and FSU individuals, loosely again, the friends, the roommates, talk to you about her life. You will hear the family talk to you about what they perceived as bullying incidents, where somebody would take her computer and she would just do nothing about it, speaking about Nicole, to the extent that her uncle said, just tell me where this child lives, where this kid lives, and I'll go. All of these things are happening in the life. And Myriam's response to that type of an incident, I'll just buy her another one. So yes. Did she have another computer? The answer is yes. The point here is, again, having to react to those things that a child expects you to do for them as a parent when they're going through the difficulties that they're going through in life. You will hear about her obsession, Nicole's obsession, not only with computers, but with, for instance, the movie called Frozen, with the character Elsa. Her obsession with a fear of having to do things in the manner in which her mother wanted them done. In other words, perfection. A common phrase that the family comes to hear from Nicole Nachtman: don't tell mom. Don't tell mom. Don't tell mom that I'm here, or don't tell mom that I spent $75 buying some type of sword. Don't tell mom this, don't tell mom that. That became a phrase. And again, what did anyone do? They didn't tell mom. But they also did not take it to the next step and say, Nicole, what is wrong? What is going on? You're going to hear that in 2012, Myriam Dienes buys her house in Tampa, Florida, moves to Tampa with Bob Dienes, who has been, for 11 years at that point in 2015, Nicole's stepfather. Yet you will hear from the testimony that not anybody really knew very much about Bob. They really, David Lear is going to say, well, I used to go over there once in a while and help him with projects. And he's going to remember one instance about a week before. But I want you to listen carefully to the cross-examination of Mr. Lear so that you can determine for yourself just how much there is to know about Mr. Dienes. Within that year of Myriam finally coming to Tampa, getting her home here. Nicole Nachtman's graduating from Sickles. Graduations are a tremendously important thing in a high schooler's mind. And if you're going to go to a graduation ceremony, you want your friends and families there. You will hear that Nicole Nachtman's no friends, and the only two people at her graduation were her mother and Bob Dienes. No other family members, even though they live in Tampa, Florida. And you're going to hear about a specific incident that occurs that, again, goes towards the abuse and the demeaning of Nicole Nachtman. Why this is important and why I say these things is because the reality of it is you're going to hear that the relationship between Myriam Dienes and Nicole Nachtman seriously interplayed with Nicole's development of mental health deterioration, to her psychotic break, and to this courtroom. I don't say these things lightly. Don't think it's not uncomfortable to talk about two people who have tragically died. But a damaged person sits here today, and the evidence is going to support that you're going to hear. The tragedy's real. It comes from many witnesses that will walk you through from her birth to the onset of a number of red flags that would have led someone to believe there is something wrong with my child and I need to do something on her behalf. Something that then leads to a psychotic break and ultimately, yes, ladies and gentlemen, not guilty by reason of insanity. And it's there. I want you to understand that. I accept, as does Ms. Hersey Folgera, that responsibility, and we will present to you the evidence that you can follow and that you can yourself judge in that respect. The evidence is going to show you that the physical incidents, the psychological incidents, the biological family pathology have brought us here just as much as what Mr. Terry said to you, the acts. Because I want to remind you what we talked about earlier. Insanity is going to apply after you make your determination to the charges and the elements and what the state of Florida has proven. You will hear from Joey Carey. And yes, the state is going to call him. And depending somehow on how the courtroom operations work and how we do the evidence presentation, we may very well have to call him back to the stand as our witness. But the reality of it is he's going to testify, and he's going to testify absolutely as it relates to his conversations with his sister. And he's also going to talk to you, though, as I've indicated to you, about the life. About his observations of Nicole, about how she spoke to him, her tone, her demeanor, when she was talking about the death of Myriam and Bob, about how lonely she felt and how unsupported she felt and how she needed help. You will hear, and everybody is talking about, she gets into Florida State University, she's off to London. She did pretty well there. You'll hear conversations between Joey and Nicole where she, on the other hand, describes what was really going on with her in London. That she was already starting to hear the screaming in her head. She no longer had the adult supervision. She was having to care for herself. You're going to hear from her roommates shortly after returning back from London. And so think about this timing. We're not talking about 2004 and 2015. We're talking about 2013 happening already. Her roommates will tell you, her suite mates will tell you, people that met her there will tell you, No parents or friends helped to move her in. Her hygiene was so bad, she literally smelled. They would find her sleeping in study rooms when it was clearly prohibited, even though she had her own room. They would find her sleeping in a bathroom, in a different hall. And they would say to her, the room over there that you have, how unhappy Nicole was that her mother was controlling her major, that she had controlled it from before she applied and was continuing to control it. How Nicole was physically changing her grades so that her mother would not know that in fact she had gone from A's and B's to F's. Her roommates will talk about her inability and lack of relationships. She had one friend that you will hear from that will testify. They will talk to you, however, about her obsession with Japanese anime. This obsession with Elsa and Frozen to the extent that she actually dyes her hair because she wants to look just like Elsa. And not just for Halloween night, we're talking about over a period of time. Her roommates will discuss with you Nicole's reaction to the phone calls made by her mother, and that although they couldn't hear the conversation, that it was very clear that Myriam was yelling at Nicole. The fact that Nicole would rent a storage location because she could not remember if the bike that her mother had bought her to take to FSU had been lost or stolen. And so instead she came up with, let me just get a storage unit and tell Mom all my stuff is there during the summer break, including my bike. Of the inability of Nicole to even navigate where to park her car because it had gotten either parking tickets or towed, because apparently when there's a football game at FSU, everybody has to reshuffle themselves in some way. And Nicole couldn't even navigate that, so she would leave her car at a person's apartment complex, not just for the day of the football game, but for days and days at a time. What was happening to Nicole Nachtman in her FSU days was that this already damaged girl with the mental health red flags that had been identified for years by outsiders, by interested, objective outsiders who were responsible for her well-being in the school systems or in the court systems, was now on her own with a demanding schedule, much different than the schedule in London. As you will hear that Nicole will talk to you about, it's better for me if there's an every other day class instead of every day of classes, because then it gives me some empty time so that I can live in my fantasy world instead of the world of FSU, classes, education. You see, ladies and gentlemen, her deterioration started early on, and her coping skills were never developed. There was never any mental health intervention. You will learn and hear that even when it was suggested, whether it be by any family member or a school system or a doctor, that there was never any follow-through. And instead, what you will learn is that Nicole's mother instead focused on Nicole Nachtman's physical appearance. At the age of 19, Myriam Dienes paid for her 19-year-old child to undergo 2 liposuction surgeries. Although 5'2" and weighing 130 pounds, that was the decision that her mother made. You need liposuction. Nicole did not want the surgery, but she complied. And if you're asking yourself, why didn't she just say no? She's 19 years of age. Because after years of incidents, after years of abuse, after years of no development, and instead deterioration, that's just not an option for Nicole Nachtman. And Mr. Terry has already alluded to that around the 2015, and that's absolutely true, in 2015, during the summer months, Myriam Dienes wants Nicole to have LASIK surgery instead of wearing glasses. The evidence is not going to show you that Nicole didn't just want the surgery. I didn't want it. She feared the surgery. David Lear tries to convince her together with Myriam, oh, it's no big deal. Myriam even asked Joey Carey, why don't you try to convince your sister to do this? No, Mom, she's afraid of it. She's afraid of it. Again, the evidence is going to show you, however, that that's just not an option for Nicole Nachtman to say, I don't want it and I'm not going. You're going to see evidence that the appointment had already been set and scheduled. If you're questioning the impact of influences of Myriam on Nicole, and you're wondering, well, so what? You say no, or you run away from home, or you do whatever you do. Whatever all these alternatives are that someone thinks that a 19-year-old in Nicole Nachtman's condition, or at her, at her immature, lack of developed stage, if you're wondering about that, you're going to hear from Joey Carey himself that is going to tell you that in 2011, he's living in New York with his own world, his own family. And Myriam says, I want you to let Nicole come and live with you in New York. And as a matter of fact, I want you to live in a certain area, a certain school district.
Yeah, absolutely.
Quiet down, please. Quarter still. That's good here.
So ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear from Joey Carey, and he'll talk to you about a time period of 2 years where he and his mother did not speak, and he will tell you, perhaps in his own words, why he was not speaking with his mother. You're also going to hear from the evidence and be able to use your common sense that there's no doubt at the time and during this time period of Nicole Nachtman's growing up that she needed guidance. She needed serious guidance through her life. She needed stable guidance. She needed someone to embrace her physical appearance and not someone who would instead demean her appearance. She would need someone to develop her self-esteem just as any child would need that from their parents and or their caregivers. someone who would see the signs of mental health deterioration and provide not only the intervention to provide for basic life skills, but a way for her to truly be on her own if you're going to send her to be on her own. Is room and board important? Of course. Am I going to ever say, or is Miss Hersey Folgera ever going to say that there was not a nice house that began in 2012 here in Tampa that you're going to see, that Nicole literally lived in for a few months before she was off to London? That the house had a nice pool, that the house had a lake, there were dogs and cats? Of course, that is going to be the evidence. But you're also going to hear from family members that Nicole Nachtman was an introvert, shy, awkward, preferred to be by herself, preferred to be in her room, preferred to be in her computer. And that there had to be reasons for that, and that there had to have been red flags that went unanswered. That she was becoming more broken, that she was becoming more deteriorating and vulnerable. In London, the expert testimony will tell you that they relied on what Joey Carey said to them about his conversations with Nicole. And let's remember about the conversations that we're talking about. We're talking about the conversation where he is talking to her about the death of their mother, and the stepfather. That is between brother and sister. It is not with an attorney. It is not with law enforcement officers. It is not a conversation where she is doing anything but telling her brother, this is what's been happening to me, Joey. This is what's been happening to me. And when everybody says, why didn't she say something to Joey? Joey knew when he had to, after spending the month, Joey knew that he had to drag her from the home to take her out, because all these other things, all these other observations that were being made were real observations. She told Joey not to tell Mom something. So please, don't be distracted and derailed by this, that Nicole Nachtman, the broken, damaged child, should have done this, and this, when everybody else around her is older, more mature, more developed, does not suffer from mental health illness, has not had a psychotic break, or had no red flags in their life, were not crying out for help. And so let's of course get to August of 2015. What I believe the evidence will let you hear and perhaps see in some circumstances shortly before the death of Myriam Dienes and Robert Dienes. I anticipate that the experts will tell you that they relied upon a statement made by Nicole Nachtman that about a week before the deaths of Bob and Myriam, maybe a little bit longer, Myriam Dienes actually found Nicole in her room with the gun and sleeping pills. And she asked Nicole, do I need to get you help? And Nicole said no. And Myriam's response was to teach Nicole how to shoot that gun. Are these circumstances a cry for help? A first indication of suicidal ideation? We believe the evidence will show you yes. You also have opportunities to use your own common sense about that type of a scenario. And at the same time, the evidence is going to show you that, yes, it's very true. In her deteriorated condition, with her vulnerabilities, with her inabilities to navigate through the simple things in life like taking a bath, of knowing where to park your car, of knowing whether you lost your bike or it was stolen. She could not navigate the process of how to obtain housing at FSU and had in fact discovered, my stepfather and my mother are expecting me to leave and go. Because of the deterioration in her mental health, she became fearful of how her mother would react to this, once again, failure on her part to do what she needed to do. A telephone conversation between Myriam and Bob shortly before Bob's death raised more fear in Nicole because of what she heard on Bob's part of the conversation. For Nicole, the pressure's building, and you're going to hear an expert testify to you and share with you exactly how her childhood affected her life and was in play during the time period of August of 2015. That expert testimony is going to be given to you not only based on their training and experience, but on a review of substantial long-term family court records, school records, psychological records, depositions, police reports, interviews of Nicole Nachtman, not just by them, but interviews by others. You will hear very specifically what are the characteristics of mental illness and how do you come up with a diagnosis, and you're going to hear that it is done through what is called, in our world, a DSMV. It's a Diagnostical and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It is something that has been adopted and is renownedly used and known across the field of mental disorders by the American Psychiatry Association. It is, in other words, the word in this area. I didn't mean to do that. That expert testimony is going to show you and explain to you how in the days leading to the deaths of Bob and Myriam, Nicole Nachtman was being delusional and suffering from suicidal ideation, and in fact her delusion was that her mother was really going to kill her based on her prior experiences and the psychotic breaks that are starting to happen. The expert will give you an explanation of how Bob Dienes was in fact killed while Nicole Nachtman was in a psychotic state. They will provide you the opinion, but they will also direct you to the specific characteristics and the specific instances in Nicole Nachtman's life that tie in directly to the specific characteristics of the mental disorder. You will hear that Nicole Nachtman's processes were scrambled. You will hear that the diagnosis of schizophrenia and its DSMV characteristics, such as disorganized speech and thoughts, will be provided to you with specificity. And you will have tangible things to touch for this, not just the expert. Nicole Nachtman will be described in certain instances by more than one expert that she can ramble and be derailed, that her demeanor and conduct can have an inappropriate affect, ranging from childhood silliness to unpredictable agitation. Again, characteristics provided in the DSMV, characteristics of the diagnosis of schizophrenia. That Nicole Nachtman, in ranging from laughing and giggling to shouting and being completely upset and distraught, almost on the turn of a dime, again, characteristics. Past behaviors, again, told by people other than Nicole Nachtman herself, independent people, that she would stay up all night and sleep all day. And clearly a problem with that is she's in FSU and supposed to be in classes. And when she is up, she's on a computer. You're not hearing that she's going to classes. Nicole Nachtman suffers from schizophrenia, and remember, these symptoms are occurring as early as when she's hearing the screaming voices in London in 2013. Not post-August 2015, when perhaps Nicole Nachtman has met her two lawyers. So watch for anything or any intent to derail you on that thought process. These are all things that are happening before the arrest of Nicole Nachtman. The expert's also going to share with you what are called negative symptoms, such as avolition, the severe lack of capacity or initiative to accomplish purposeful tasks, such as attending classes, attending to your hygiene, instead of being obsessed on a computer and living in a fantasy world, doing things that are clearly not matching up to what your chronological age is. The expert's going to tell you that he does rely on the things that Joey Carey has said. Again, Joey Carey, who although, yes, he wants to protect his sister, he also has, in fact, told law enforcement, talked to the state attorney's office, talked to us about the conversations that he had with his sister. In other words, the bottom line is daily life, daily challenges, daily needs, daily movements are difficult for Nicole Nachtman. She does not operate in the adult world in a successful way. If you don't tell her to shower, she won't. If you tell her you smell, stop it. Even if it's going to affect a relationship with somebody, she doesn't have the capacity to change. You're going to hear that from one of her former roommates. Some will tell you, perhaps, that these are all just signs of depression. And could be signs of depression, and the answer to that is yes. But you will hear expert opinion, based again on education, experience, the DSM-5, that about half the people who suffer from schizophrenia, in fact, suffer from depression also. And the symptoms would mean of both. The words of Nicole Nachtman, where she says and explains London and says, the normal FSU classes where you have to go to school every day, it's not good, but empty space for your brain to reset and procrastinate or take a break and go into a fantasy world. And in her own words, a lot of time I did not want to come back to reality. And again, those words are words that she is speaking to her brother at the same time that she's telling him about the deaths of Myriam and Bob. So it's an entire conversation, not just about one thing. And her brother will confirm that that's in fact what she said about nightmares, about screaming voices, about an inability to control the nightmares and the screaming voices. And he will tell you that what Nicole told him was, yes, I was trying to leave. On August the 20th, I was trying to leave. I went out the window. But, I ran into Mom. And what she said to me is, not what the heck are you doing here, not what the hell are you doing here, but what the F are you doing here? And Mr. Carey, based on what he heard from Nicole telling him about what happened on August the 20th, took the impression that Myriam confronted Nicole. And Joey will even tell you that his impression was that Nicole just didn't even seem to understand that being arrested was a big deal. And why is that? And that is because her thought processes are nowhere in the reality world. As you will hear from an expert, as you will hear from the characteristics of her illness. Nicole herself describes her college life as a fantasy that's blurred with reality. Nothing to focus on. The evidence is going to show that she told her brother, I have no compass, I have no map, I have no direction. But fantasy is something I'm very familiar with. It's a plot that is going somewhere to a degree. And the question is, does this sound like she was doing well in life? Does this sound normal, or does it fit into what the experts will tell you is the disease, the defect, the diagnosis of schizophrenia and its symptoms and its factors? Our expert will tell you that it is classic schizophrenia. And how he sees that based on a substantial amount of opportunity to observe her affect being all over the place and grossly inappropriate, her dysphoric mood, the knowledge of disturbed sleeping patterns corroborated by people other than Nicole, anxiety, which is extreme for Nicole, a reduction in attention, which is shown by what is happening to her in her days at Florida State, deficits in her ability to even infer the intentions of others. That factor in and of itself, the expert will tell you, played right into Nicole's belief that her mother was really going to kill her because she didn't have housing, based on all the other things that had happened to her in the past and how her mother had reacted. You will hear that even today, the opinion will be that Nicole Nachtman can't perceive very well what other people are intending. She has a lack of insight, which is the most common predictor of a poor prognosis, a poor outcome for this illness, because, ladies and gentlemen, Nicole Nachtman doesn't even understand and accept that she is mentally ill. The expert will tell you that this mental illness did not come on in August of 2015, but in fact is supported by the slow and gradual development of all the symptoms that can be identified throughout her life. Her symptomology, in the expert's opinion, started at least in the 3rd grade and perhaps earlier during the bitter custody battle. In and out of schools, bullied, doesn't fit in, red flagged, psychological problems, no treatment, no intervention. Not even discussions other than the one time involving the gun incident, and the intervention there was to show her how to use the gun. Situations such as her school going down the drain can clearly be associated with the symptoms of schizophrenia. I believe that you will hear that the experts even relied on that Nicole had a job once. She had a job at McDonald's that she loved. Best thing in her life. But she could only do one task. And when there was a request to move from one task to another, no good, I'm good. I'm good. The evidence will show you limited social contact. Has never been on a date. Has never kissed a boy or had some type of physical relationship. She liked someone once and ran up to him and told him that she thought he was cute and then ran away immediately. That's been her one reach out. No idea what he was going to respond. Why? Because the expert will tell you in Nicole's world that she was living in, based on the abusive aspects of being, your personal appearance is important, that she didn't think anyone could like her. The expert will also explain to you that based on his experience, his education, his training, that early 20s is a common age for a psychotic break to occur, and that the lack of the nurturing environment, the abusive circumstances of her life, the lack of a support system, the lack of adequate treatment led to the deterioration of her mental health, ultimately to a full-blown mental illness, diagnosed as schizophrenia, and that the years of deterioration, the mental illness, her suicidal ideations, her fear of being killed, her delusions, and a psychotic break support the defense of insanity as to the deaths of Bob Dienes and Myriam Dienes. And we're not really supposed to go back to the jury selection process with specificity, but in an abundance of some respect for the time that we are at today, I would be talking to you about the insanity defense jury instruction that I believe that at some time the court will read to you if the evidence supports it. And I am standing here today to tell you that our expert will in fact provide that evidence. So you may be wondering, why am I so focused on Myriam Dienes? Why am I not talk to you about Bob Dienes other than tell you that they've been married for 11 years? And you may be waiting for me to tell you what's the evidence going to show you. And I think what the evidence is going to show you that, yes, they married in 2004. They lived together for 11 years. The majority of the time, Nicole Nachtman was not living in that environment with them. And for those 11 years, even if she was living with them for a portion of that time, and let's say 50% of the time, 60%, let's even go to 90. She's bouncing from school to school, because remember what we talked about. She's bouncing still from parent to grandparent and from home to home, and she is, again, a young person waiting on her life skills and her development, and for someone to intervene on behalf of obviously her lack of development and the mental health flags that have been thrown up. So what that means is that if in fact Bob Dienes was actively engaged, just like Myriam Dienes was, and I am not in any way suggesting that any evidence that I or Ms. Hersey-Fulgera intend to give you will support that. But if you were to get there, then two parents, could you just, if you don't mind, I'm sorry, but it's very distracting to me. Two parents failed the broken, vulnerable child who had deteriorating mental health and who sits here today with an expert that's going to testify that she has a true mental disorder called schizophrenia. I will accept that, because that means two, her stepfather and her mother. I would suggest to you that the evidence is going to show you that he was not involved in the day-to-day raising of Nicole, in her care, in her development, or in her nurturing. Instead, I believe that Bob Dienes also lived in the same environment, in the same home that Nicole did, where you had a successful, controlling, domineering presence in Myriam Dienes. I will suggest to you that the evidence will show you that Bob Dienes did not become or supplant in any way Ronald Nachtman, her biological father, who was excluded from her life, and become her protector, or in any way the person that Nicole could go to and say, Bob, I don't want LASIK surgery. Can you tell Mom? Bob, I don't want lipo. Can you tell Mom? Because instead what you heard was that people are going to testify that Myriam went to them seeking their help on those issues. Nicole Nachtman was alone. She was psychotic. She was insane. And this was the result of, unfortunately, an upbringing that was what it was. Something that I can't control and no one else in this courtroom could have controlled. And she should not be faulted for not having the ability.
Judge, I have
Take
a
side
real
legal
quick,
basis.
argumentative and not.
Sustained, sustained, don't argue your case.
Thank you, Judge. And we should not look for evidence that says that Ms. Nachtman had an obligation to raise herself, to get herself psychiatric help, to get herself intervention, to get herself basic life skills. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Hersey Folgera and I are convinced that at the end of everything that you are going to hear and see, and in keeping an open mind and keeping to your commitment to follow the law that is supported by the evidence, that you will find that Ms. Nachtman was in fact insane at the time of the deaths of Robert and Myriam, and had been abused and battered throughout her childhood and her life. Thank you very much.
Ms. Holt, can you move this so that I can see my exhibit?
Which one? Oh, yes. Of course.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.